Why did Trammell Tillman agree to dance again? What filming accident made it into the final episode? And what change did Ben Stiller make to the final scene of this season? We'll be covering these questions and more in this video. Welcome to Square Eyes. In this video, I'll take you through my 5 favourite moments from the Season 2 finale of Severance. If you agree with my choices, remember to subscribe. If you disagree, tell me your favourite moments in the comments. Let's jump straight into my first choice. Number 1. Mark v Mark. My first pick is the scene where Innie and Outie Mark talk to each other for the first time. I liked how the camcorder was used as a device for them to interact directly. It felt realistic in this story world. It gave us an opportunity to see both Marks communicating with each other without any kind of camera trickery. The season has played around with the idea of how similar Outies and Innies are, so this long scene between the two of them was justified as it really dug into both Marks' perspectives. Outie Mark wants his Innie to prioritise rescuing Gemma over his own life, while Innie Mark isn't against the idea as such, but gets a feeling that his Outie's taking advantage of him. This isn't completely incorrect either, as Outie Mark does seem to be manipulating his Innie. Outie Mark makes some basic errors when he's dealing with his Innie in this scene. Getting Helly's name wrong and calling her Heleny was the start. It made it clear that Outie Mark doesn't really care about his life at all, despite him expecting his Innie to more or less sacrifice himself for him. He also suggests that his feelings for Gemma are deeper and more meaningful than his Innie's feelings for Helly. While this is probably true, it's another way that he's diminishing his Innie's feelings and importance. With the popular saying that a difficult person can get into an argument in a room with just them in it, this is exactly what happens to Mark here. The conversation started off civil, and Innie Mark looked delighted to be talking to his Outie, but he descended to a point where they were both shouting into the camera at each other, as they both realised that their goals are irreconcilable with each other. Adam Scott did an excellent job with both sides of this scene, showing both the similarities and differences between the two Marks. The big idea behind Severance is really boiled down to its essence in these scenes, and we see the conflict between Innie and Outie played out on the screen. Number 2. Dylan's Outie comes through. My second choice for my favourite scenes from this episode is when Innie Dylan reads his Outie's response to his resignation request. The scene opens with a brilliant comedic moment where Milchick puts the envelope down in front of Dylan and sprints out of the door. It seemed like it was because he feared a violent attack from Dylan, but we found out later that he had other things that he desperately needed to attend to. Communication between the two Dylans was very different to the one between both Marks, because it starts out with them both opposed. Outie Dylan is angry with his Innie for kissing his wife, but as the correspondence continues, we see Outie Dylan warming to his Innie's perspective. In storytelling terms, Outie Dylan is Innie Dylan's antagonist, the bad guy, as he's getting in the way of his goal of being with Gretchen. But he doesn't play out like that in the end, as Outie Dylan leaves it for his Innie to decide whether he should leave or not. But he does explain that Innie Dylan has been a source of inspiration for his Outie, and has made him want to be a better person. The best version of Dylan is the Innie one. He's motivated, ambitious, and hasn't been beaten down by the world. So Outie Dylan wants his Innie to carry on, because he wants him to keep on doing what he does. This was a great way to resolve the situation with Dylan, as it hints that the two versions of him could work in harmony. Whether Mark's desires are invested in two different people, both Dylans want the same person, and their situation is easier to resolve. Milchick talked in the opening episode about Cobell wanting to form a throuple with both Marks, but now it seems like a potentially viable option for the Dylans and Gretchen, depending on how things shake out with the Innies and the Severed Floor. It's been great to see Zach Cherry get more story to get his teeth into in this season. I've only ever seen him play mostly comedic roles, and in Season 1 he was probably the least fleshed out of the 4 MDR team members. In Season 2 he's had a chance to show a broad range of acting ability, which came to a head in this scene. Number 3. Milchick's dance routine. The next scene I've chosen is the marching band scene, which was just the right kind of weird for Severance. It fit perfectly with Mark completing Cold Harbour, while still also being completely unpredictable. The way it was shot really helped to capture the weirdness of this moment, with Mark and Helly looking completely baffled. It was a good moment for Milchick too, as just before the band came in, he'd been once again disrespected by Lumen management. This time an animatronic Keir Egan was roasting him for his elaborate choice of words, so him getting his moment with the band felt well deserved. Trammell Tillman said in interviews that there was a racial undertone to the way that the company had treated him this season. He also confirmed that leading the marching band was Milchick's way of asserting his blackness. These bands are linked to historically black colleges and universities in America, so by leading one at work, he's embracing both his company and his racial identity. The meaning behind Milchick leading the band changes when you realise it was his choice rather than the company forcing him to do it. He's showing agency and expressing himself after feeling confined by his superiors for most of this season. Trammell Tillman also said that he wasn't keen on the idea of dancing again after the music dance experience in Season 1. He changed his mind when he found out that it would involve a marching band though, as he was in a similar marching band himself as a youth. I don't think there needs to be any deep reason for the marching band, beyond how much fun it was to see them burst in and Milchick dancing again. However, the band did help to create the feeling of disorientation and chaos that was needed to believe that Mark could easily slip out and make his way to the testing floor. So the band did serve the story, as well as being a fun moment in its own right. Also, if you want to watch Trammell Tillman leading his marching band into the theatre for the Severance finale screening in Hollywood, I'll post a link to the video in the description. Number 4. Drummond and Mark fight. If the marching band created a moment of joy, my next favourite scene created a sense of dread, when Mark fought with Mr. Drummond. There isn't a great deal of fighting or violence in Severance. which I think helped this scene hit harder because it was very graphic and intense. Mr. Drummond has been an imposing presence throughout this season, but this was the first time we saw him fully flex his muscles as he slammed Mark repeatedly against the walls. While it always felt like plot armor would protect Mark from actually being killed by Drummond, I wasn't completely certain of this when his face started to turn a bit purple. The fight between Drummond and Mark may seem very realistic in places, and that's because there's one moment where Adam Scott is genuinely chucked against the wall and bangs his head quite hard. He talked about it on the official Severance podcast. He was meant to throw his arm back against the wall to cushion the blow, but he got tangled up and his head hit the wall instead. While Ben Stiller expressed concern about his actor getting hurt, it was obvious on the podcast that he was quite pleased to have got a shot that made the scene more realistic. In the end, it was the goats that saved Mark from Drummond, as Lorne was so distressed by the thought of sacrificing the goat that she cared so much about that she turned on Drummond. While the goats being used as a ritual sacrifice wasn't a big shock compared to the wild theories about them online, they did end up playing a big role in the climax of this season's story. Things got bloodier from this moment onwards, and Lorne, with a bit of help from Mark, subdued Drummond. Watching Gwendolyn Christie fighting a big bloke had echoes of her big fights in Game of Thrones as Brienne of Tarth. It also fit in with the idea that it's not just the MDR team, but every department on the 7th floor that's on the verge of rebellion. We also saw this when Helly was able to turn the merriment and choreography department to her cause with a rousing speech. Number 5. Gemma sees Innie Mark choose Helly. My final choice for my favourite moments in the Season 2 finale has to be the closing scene, where Innie Mark has to choose between life with Helly on the 7th floor or his Outie's life with Gemma. This was a central choice that this season has been building up to all along. The honourable thing would have been to escape with Gemma, but I think it was more realistic that Innie Mark chose his own needs over his Outie's. Let's face it, Innie Mark only exists because Outie Mark chose to opt out of work life and make his Innie do the work for him. So Innie Mark doesn't owe his Outie self anything. The writer of the show, Dan Erickson, said in an interview with Vulture that he sees the final scene with Innie Mark as a counterpoint to the first scene of this season, when Mark burst out of the elevator and sprinted to find Miss Casey. Even though she wasn't there, his instinct was to go straight away to her rather than check in with his MDR team friends. So in this final moment, we see that Innie Mark has changed because when he's given a choice between the inside and outside world, he puts himself first and prioritises his existence. There's another interesting parallel between this moment and the point earlier in the episode when Gemma has to choose between trusting Dr. Mauer, telling her to stay, and Outie Mark telling her to leave. The Cold Harbour version of Gemma chooses to leave with Mark, whereas Innie Mark chose staying with Helly over leaving the 7th floor. The two situations aren't exactly comparable, but it suggests that maybe Gemma wasn't fully severed from her Outie's desires, whereas Mark was. I think there's potential for Mark to be on the testing floor next season, and he could effectively be the next Gemma for Lumen to experiment on. The drama of this final scene comes from Gemma being at one end of the hall, and Helly being at the other. This almost didn't happen, as Dan Erickson originally envisioned this scene with just Mark and Gemma, but Ben Stiller convinced him that it'd be more dramatic with both of Mark's love interests in the scene when he had to choose. There was also talk of ending the season before Mark had made his choice and making us wait until season 3 to find out what he decided. I'm glad they showed us Mark making his decision, as there's still a lot that remains unexplained that can be unpacked in season 3, but at least we know that Mark and Helly are on the inside and Gemma has a chance of making it to the outside. These were my 5 favourite moments from the episode, but there were many more that I could easily have picked. If I've missed a bit from the episode that you particularly enjoyed, then let me know in the comments. I'm also thinking about making a video about what might happen in season 3 of Severance. Tell me in the comments if this is something you'd like to see. And if you've not watched them yet, my other videos for season 2 of Severance should be on the screen now. Thanks for watching this video all the way to the end. Goodbye.